Breaking Down the Law is sponsored by Battle-Born Injury Lawyers.
Harvey Weinstein, recently convicted of sex crimes in New York, convicted on 2 out of 5 counts, and he is scheduled for sentencing March 11th. Of course, he's in the hospital right now. Weinstein's attorney is vowing to appeal the convictions, but he's also facing charges in Los Angeles. That trial date hasn't even been set yet. Here to discuss the issue, attorney Matt Hoffman with Battle-Born Injury Lawyers. There are so many questions here. I'm hesitant to even start in one direction because I guess the first thing that we have to take into account is that he was convicted on 2 out of 5. The jury still had questions. They weren't sure about one of the testimonies.
Yeah, so the key thing in this case, and number one, I'm not a Harvey Weinstein apologist in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, we're just looking at the legal perspective here.
There's some interesting things that happened. So the biggest crime that he could have been convicted of was predatory sexual assault. And that could have carried a life sentence. And to get that, you have to have 2 or more victims and have a jury conclude that both were the victims of a same or similar behavior, and there was a pattern.
Okay.
And instead of just combining the 2 victims, in this case, Miss Haley and Miss Mann, who actually had cases within the statute of limitations, they brought in Annabella Shora, who did not have valid claims within the statute of limitations, but had corroborating testimony. And they combined her claims with Miss Mann and then separately with Miss Haley so they could bring 2 counts of this predatory sexual assault.
Okay.
And actually put her on the verdict form. And so ultimately the jury, I think last Friday, asked the judge, hey, if we're unanimous on these other 3, what about these 2? And they were confused. The judge said keep deliberating, and ultimately they found for Miss Haley on first-degree sexual assault and for Miss Mann on third-degree rape, not on first-degree rape.
And explain the difference.
So first-degree is basically force, you're using force or the threat of force.
Okay.
That's what her testimony was, that he forced her to disrobe and other things.
Sure.
Third degree normally is reserved for statutory rape.
I see.
So that you don't have a legal capacity to give consent. And what it means is that for some other reason, it was sex without consent. And that's what he was found guilty of. What's, I guess, I'm not gonna say troubling, but weird, is that first degree sexual assault as to Miss Haley, which was forced oral sex, that's the one where he has 5 to 25 years in prison.
Up to 25 years for that.
For third degree sexual intercourse, rape, up to 5 years, as little as 0.
So where did those requirements come from? 0 to 5 years for something that most people would deem more significant of a crime.
I agreed, and that's what's so strange about it, and I think that's what's going to form the basis of the appeal. So I got the verdict sheet that was given to the jury, and I mean, it's really confusing.
So it's confusing for you as a lawyer.
Yes.
And these jury members obviously had questions and came back. So
Yes.
so what this says is appeal.
Yeah, and that's the next phase. I mean, we always hear that we're going to appeal, and you can appeal anything. But in this case, I think one of the primary things that was objected to by the defense that's going to come up is why was Annabella Shora allowed to be on the verdict form? She had no claims.
She wasn't in the statute of
No.
limitations. So she, like you said, no claim. Okay.
And it begs the question. Yes, yes, they found for Miss Haley and Miss Mann, but had those 2 claims been combined for the predatory sexual assault claim, would they have found him guilty at all?
Interesting.
Or did they feel like they had to because they were acquitting him as to the claims involving Miss Shora? That's what's going to be the big issue on appeal.
And I know before we run out of time, we want to talk about Los Angeles because the date hasn't even been set for
Right.
that, but he is facing charges there.
Yeah, so when he gets out of the hospital and ends up in Rikers Island, then they'll release him to prison in LA County, where he can now go to trial. And in that one, it's a similar allegations, but unlike the New York victims, there is no allegation of communication with email and text messages afterwards. These were more one-time incidents, carrying up to 28 years in prison. He's 67. I think that even with appeals, Harvey Weinstein's going to be in prison for the rest of his life.
Is there any sort of sympathy factor with the jury when you're talking about a guy who's right now in the hospital for heart palpitations and high blood pressure, I believe both of those things? They're seeing his age, they're seeing him come in on, a walker. Do these things play into the jury?
Yeah, I mean, they all do, as does the outrage of the victims. But I mean, he was coming into New York court in a walker with tennis balls on it, and I don't think the jury cared about that, obviously, from the verdict. So.
Wow, well, lots to talk about. I think the key takeaway for me is the fact that you, as an attorney, are still saying, interesting.
Yeah, the verdict form is confusing, and
Okay.
I think the appeal is going to be a little bit more higher profile than most appeals.
Interesting. Matthew Hoffman, well said. Thank you for breaking down the law for us today with a case that is certainly not, sadly, but certainly not going anywhere anytime soon. It's something we'll continue to follow.